So hi, I'm Emma Blomkamp, the convener and founder of Co-Design Co, and we are delighted to be presenting the Doing Design Differently tour with George A. of Greater Good Studio. George, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and where you're visiting from?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. This is so exciting. It's really, really, really exciting. My name's George A., one of the co-founders of Greater Good Studio. We are based in Chicago, that's in the United States. We have been in business now for 12 years, actually 12 years this summer. We're going to be having a summer party just outside this window tomorrow evening with the rest of the team. This tour has just been a dream of mine for a long time, and I'm really so excited to be able to come out to see you and to see others.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on 12 years. What initially sparked your interest in coming to Australia and New Zealand?
Oh, there's so many things. So it turns out actually just a few years ago, right around the time when COVID was happening, we at the studio hosted a virtual conference, something called the Restorative Design Conference. And the way that the event ticket system worked, we were able to see like a global map of where the tickets were. Most of them had obviously been kind of in and around the Midwest and Chicago, some in Europe, and like a small little bubble of tickets were sold in like Australia and New Zealand. Thinking, who do we know in Australia and New Zealand? I don't know anybody out there. And it kind of struck us by surprise that there was anybody kind of paying attention to us at all. And over the last several years, once I kind of realized that there was a community of designers doing this similar work, I started to reach out and meet with more and more people like yourselves and others, and realizing, oh, there's an entire community that I didn't even know about. So it started to dawn on me that I might need to be in community with you, and it's hard to do only through Zoom. So my hope was to get a little closer, to like get in actual proximity with all of you and learn as much as I can by coming to visit.
I know a lot of people in this part of the world have found out about you and been inspired by your Medium posts. Of what you've published online, what have you found people are most interested to talk to you about?
People still are going back to probably the first piece of writing that we ever did around power and design education. That is still it's not like I have a lot of hits, but that would be one of the ones that probably been the most popular. And that piece still speaks to, I think, a lot of designers who are around about so that the same kind of age and sort of moment in their career, realizing how many gaps we experienced when we were being trained and came up through design education. And I think as many of us now realize those gaps show up as potential liabilities as us as professional designers, um, that might leave yourself with wondering, hey, what can we do about it? But especially if you're an educator, then it start to become a question of like, oh, what kind of cycles am I going to start to continue to recreate if I don't pause and just check to see like where do I stand with these topic areas now? So there's still a lot of interest in speaking to and talking about that media post, even though it's from 2007 now.
Well, we'll be really interested in exploring some of those topics with you in the talks and workshops you're doing down here. But how did you get so interested in questions of power and ethics and design? Like, what motivated you to write that post, for instance?
Well, I still feel myself a little bit like I'm still very new to the social design scene. And I think because my background and my co-founder's background had been more in commercial design versus the social sector outright, I think we were kind of cautious about claiming to be something that we perhaps would not be, or be immediately seen as being false. So we were quite cautious of just being uh, kind of staying within our lane. And I think in doing so, we were cautious to make sure that we uh, understood what is our domain and perhaps what others are. And I think we had like a professional crush, as I still kind of do, on most of the folks who work in the social sector, more folks within the nonprofit space, foundations, and government. And I think as I started to enter those areas, working more alongside people in the nonprofit sector, their conversations around power seem so adroit and familiar and sort of like it's just so nuanced. And I realized thinking, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm really feel very out of my depth, and realizing I don't know if I'm really going to be able to keep up in these conversations if I don't maybe kind of take some stock of what is my own understanding of power, what power do I have, and multiplied by the fact that I might get invited to some spaces that I don't fully understand. So in my role as a designer, I might get asked to work on projects using power that someone knows I have that I don't totally even quite take stock of. And that's why I started to realize I might be a liability if I show up in the wrong way. So how am I going to get myself more familiar? And one of the ways I've often tried to process stuff is to write about it. And I think that's turns out I definitely do not identify as a writer. I found it in enormous struggle. Um, and the idea of being able to write anything feels kind of scary, but the idea that perhaps if I can write it out, I can try to process and think through and force myself to think through logically, what am I trying to say? I found that to be a very, very helpful tool for my own learning, which thankfully some others have found value in reading.
Yeah, definitely. Your posts have resonated with me and many of my friends and peers, I know. I think you've given words to some of the issues that we're sensing and aware of. And I'm also really looking forward to hosting workshops with you where we can help to explore some of these ideas together. I think that's also a really useful way for us to process some of these issues. What are you looking forward to doing on your tour of Australia and Aotearoa?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. There is, like I said, being in proximity to, being in community to people who I've looked up to or learned from or sort of seen from afar. I know that yourself and others, I've like internet stalked or had LinkedIn crushes on or have communicated in bits and pieces. And in preparation for the tour, I know that the frequency of calls that I've had with you and others, the other hosts, has been like 10x whatever it was prior. So that's already very exciting. But to be face to face and actually be in the same room with all of you, to me, is very exciting. I also suspect that by coming out, there may be a large community of people who are feeling that they've had questions about how design happens and have wondered something about this doesn't feel right, but are afraid to say it out loud. So my hope is if they came to some of the events and they see other people, they might go, "Oh, maybe I'm not the only one thinking these thoughts." And my hope is that really I can draw, or that we can draw folks out of the woodwork who have been having these suspicions, feeling these tensions, but haven't felt quite safe enough, like there was a community around them, like there was any kind of belonging around saying out some of these tensions out loud. So my hope is these events can be a validation that those feelings are real and that others share them too. And I also suspect that we probably can't figure this all out unless we get together and like air these issues. It's a little bit like having uh like airing wounds, like hard for it sometimes to heal if it's all been covered up. Whereas I think if it kind of gets a little bit of sunlight and seawater, and maybe there's some t-shirt phrase in there that describes how healthy healing should happen. But I feel like there's an opportunity to air out some of these questions and some of these tensions, because I think when you keep it to yourself, not only do you feel alone in it, I think you end up feeling as though you might be the one that's out of place, or you might be the one that is off key or the odd one out, when actually it actually might be quite common. And you might realize so many other people are also feeling these things but will never say it out loud. So there's a lot of meta goals, I guess, to these events. Certainly there'll be some workshops and there's panels and lots of like traditional content. All that stuff I'm not worried about that. That stuff will come out from how will happen anyway. But I do hope that one of the secondary and tertiary events is secondary tertiary outcomes is just feeling like you aren't alone in all this. And it'd be nice if perhaps people work together on projects later on. That'd be awesome. So if collaborations happen, please let us know. I mean, I think all of us on the hosting team would be thrilled to know that something happened because of these collisions and collaborations, because of these events. But I do hope that there's a moment here to take stock of how special the scene, this emergent design scene is here, that is, I think, uniquely different than any other part of the world. That's my hunch, at least. And my hope is that I can get closer to it, to see it up close and personal, as opposed to have a romantic notion of it from afar. I just want to get closer to it, really.
That's, I mean, absolutely what we're hoping for as well. This building a sense of community and belonging, providing space for people to share concerns and make sense together, and hopefully forge some really productive connections and great reciprocal relationships to make the change we want to see together.
Yeah.
And perhaps we can have another one of these conversations after your trip.
No, yeah, I mean that'd be, oh
what you
God, that'd
have
be so
noticed.
nice. Yeah, I mean, I think what'd be great is uh the ultimate point of, I think, is to have better work happen. And I think part of what makes it better is that more thoughtful care about how we frame projects, who we consider as being at the center, and whose voices are being heard as the project gets created, long before designers are even involved and long before bloody proposals are like sent in. So much of it is kind of broken at the beginning. And by the time it gets to an RFP, a lot of it's baked. So how do we set about a context or the framing or some type of set of conditions so that early questions about why are these voices not here? Why we keep building to the same voices every time? When was the last time we talked to this group of people who we know are in pain? Why haven't they been consulted properly about the nature of real ownership of this project? All those things are hard to do once it's set as a published RFP. So these conversations, these workshops, these panels are trying to set about getting people to ask questions early, because when they're early enough, there's a greater chance we're going to set what that path might be. The later designers get involved, the harder it is to change the frame. So I feel like what we're trying to do is just get people to start asking questions early enough so that they can feel courageous enough to say, hey, why do I have to just knee-jerk respond to an RFP? Why can't we set what the RFP could be? But in fact, why do we even need an RFP? There is all these things we can get kind of radical if you want to, but I feel like the more upstream we can have these conversations, the greater chance that the ways in which design work in the social sector could be done with greater impact. Because I think what we've often found is design work in the social sector has a great chance of providing cover for very little change. Even though money gets changed hands, a lot of announcements, a lot of websites, a lot of activity technically happens. I don't know if power actually shifted, and I don't know if it really can, if many of the voices who have been marginalized through systems of oppression were ever given a shot into these processes. And if they never are, how can we really expect it for anything ever to really change? So all of this is sort of ambitious. I'm just hoping that we can get some of these early conversations further upstream than they have been in the past.
Yes. So how might we do design differently? How might we lead design differently? How might we commission design differently? These are some of the questions we'll be exploring with you. And we're really looking forward to connecting with lots of other folks here in Australia and in Aotearoa as you travel through Perth and Sydney in late August, and then Melbourne, Auckland, and Wellington in September. If you are keen to join us, please head to our website. We've got all of the events and dates listed at codesignco.space/design-differently. See you there.